Well, Donald Trump lost. Donald Trump lost in Florida tonight. Donald Trump endorsed a Republican congressman currently being investigated by the House Ethics Committee for possible domestic violence. And that Republican congressman, Corey Mills, lost in his Republican primary tonight, even with Donald Trump's endorsement in what is now Donald Trump's home state of Florida. The Washington Post reports that the House Ethics Committee, chaired by a Republican, quote, said it is investigating serious and complex allegations against Corey Mills, including possible domestic violence and campaign finance violations, based on a report from the Office of Congressional Conduct, which found Mills' campaign may have broken election finance law by accepting excessive contributions, and that he may have profited from federal contracts for arms while in Congress. Mills has denied these allegations, of course. Donald Trump endorsed that under investigation candidate. And why not? Donald Trump believes in profiting from holding federal office himself and has done so. Donald Trump proved once again tonight that his endorsement is not enough for Republicans to win. And Donald Trump's endorsement will be worth even less in a general election in November than it is worth in a Republican primary, especially if Donald Trump's war in Iran is still going on in November. With Donald Trump's endorsement of Corey Mills, Donald Trump was effectively saying to Florida voters, hey, you voted for me after you heard the Access Hollywood tape describing sexual assault, so why not vote for Corey Mills? The Washington Post reports, last October, a Florida judge granted an order of protection against Mills in favor of an ex-girlfriend who accused him of threatening her with revenge porn. The order of protection has since expired. Mills has denied the charges and said they were intended to damage him politically, and according to Florida voters, that is exactly what happened. It has damaged him politically, and it has proved that Donald Trump has lost his magical powers with Republican voters, even in Florida. Today, Donald Trump committed the crime of voting by mail. The man who is trying to outlaw voting by mail voted by mail.
We're the only country that does mail-in voting. Mail-in voting means mail-in cheating. I call it mail-in cheating. Mail-in ballots are inherently corrupt.
Mail-in cheating. Donald Trump did his mail-in cheating today. That's what he calls it. Donald Trump voted by mail because he hates, hates the state that he currently calls home. Hates that state in summer, at least. Donald Trump finds Florida unlivable in summer, even in the age of air conditioning. And so he chose to vote by mail in Florida's election today. Donald Trump wants voting to be convenient for him, which means by mail, and significantly more expensive for everyone else, especially people who had to drive to the polls, now that Donald Trump and his war has pushed the price of gas up over $4 a gallon. Here's what one Trump voter at the polls said today about Donald Trump's gas prices.
Gas shouldn't be that high, but everything, groceries, everything, we're just suffering right now.
That's right. Even Florida Trump voters say we're just suffering right now. And what does Donald Trump say to them?
When you have to pay a little bit more, you're at $4. It's okay. I mean, it's I'll never apologize. I did the right thing.
A majority of voters do not think that Donald Trump did the right thing by starting a war in Iran that has driven gas prices up from less than $3 a gallon to over $4 a gallon. And so on election night tonight, Donald Trump is scoring his absolute lowest approval rating in a Reuters poll, which shows him with a 33% job approval. That's down 2 percentage points from the same poll earlier this month. Donald Trump spent months saying his war in Iran would end in a couple of days. But the Reuters poll shows 80% believe Donald Trump's war in Iran will go on for an extended period of time, including 71% of Republicans who believe Donald Trump's war in Iran will go on for an extended period of time. 71% of Republicans. And yesterday, Donald Trump confirmed that those voters are right. He did that in one of those private phone call interviews with a reporter, this time with a Fox reporter, who quoted Donald Trump saying this about the end of his war: "I have no time schedule. I'm not in a hurry." So with 80% of Americans now believing that Donald Trump, who has always believed he's a great negotiator, cannot negotiate his way out of his war, Donald Trump is publicly agreeing with them and saying, "No, I cannot negotiate my way out of this war." Saying in fact, quote, "I'm not in a hurry." And Donald Trump saying "I'm not in a hurry" means Donald Trump has no idea how to negotiate his way out of the war he started with Iran. And in that very same telephone interview with that Fox reporter, Donald Trump said, "The midterms have nothing to do with my thinking." He is, of course, lying about that. He is desperately afraid of a Democratic Speaker of the House and a Democratic committee chairs in the House and in the Senate investigating Donald Trump and his family's plundering of the presidency. And so when Donald Trump says the midterms have nothing to do with my thinking, what he might really mean is, I can't think of anything to do that will help in the midterms. Donald Trump has not done a single thing to help Republicans win in November. He has only joined in Republican versus Republican primaries, and Donald Trump hasn't been able to win all of those. Donald Trump's candidate for governor in Minnesota was the My Pillow guy who didn't come close to winning the Republican nomination, even with Donald Trump's endorsement. Republican voters in Minnesota didn't care what Donald Trump thought about the clown candidate for governor who Donald Trump supported. We are not even halfway through Donald Trump's presidency, and Republican voters are increasingly saying, we don't care who Donald Trump endorses. Imagine what that might mean in the next presidential election if Donald Trump's endorsement loses value. J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio have been betting their entire political futures on the idea that Donald Trump will be the kingmaker in the next presidential election. What if he isn't? What if the whole country, including Republicans, has turned against Donald Trump 2 years from now? What if Donald Trump's endorsement for president is worth nothing 2 years from now, even in the Republican Party? Then who gets the Republican nomination for president? Then what becomes of J.D. Vance? Anything is possible between now and then, especially if Donald Trump's war is still going on then. And what we're seeing tonight with Donald Trump's disapproval ratings and with the weakness of his endorsements is that it is not impossible to imagine a Republican winning the next presidential nomination by running against Donald Trump. And if Donald Trump's war in Iran is still going on 2 years from now, then J.D. Vance might be trying to run for president against Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not just a pathological liar. He is a terrible liar. I mean, he is actually terrible at lying, just like he's terrible at everything else. And because he's terrible at lying and because he talks too much, the truth is often visible right there under his obvious and stupid lie. And so when Donald Trump says the midterms have nothing to do with my thinking, we have every right to believe that what we are hearing there are the words lying right on top of the truth, which is that Donald Trump feels helpless. Donald Trump feels lost. Donald Trump feels weak. Donald Trump feels there's nothing he can do to stop the Democrats from winning in November, and there's nothing he can do to stop his war. That new Reuters poll showed that more voters believe that Democrats will do a better job with the economy than Republicans, and more voters believe that Democrats will do a better job with the cost of living than Republicans. MS Now's Alex Tabbitt spoke to Trump voters outside a polling place in Orlando, Florida today.
Are you benefiting from this war?
No. Who's benefiting from it? Look at fuel prices. We went to Costco yesterday. It's ridiculous in there. Everything's expensive. Things are higher than they've ever been. Right? So we got to stop these wars. They cost time and money and lives.
That is what Trump voters in Florida sound like tonight. When our next guest announced his candidacy for Congress in Florida, he expected to be running against Corey Mills in November. Tonight, Navy veteran, former NASA Chief of Staff Bayle Dalton won the Democratic nomination for Congress and will now face Republican Ryan Elijah, a former Fox 35 Orlando news anchor, in November.
I'm Bayle Dalton. In the Navy, I fought terrorists in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've proudly worn the uniform for 24 years, showing my name right here on my chest. So it makes me mad as hell to see ICE agents hide their names and mask their faces. Now our Congressman, Corey Mills, is hiding whether his company corruptly got government contracts. I'm Bayle Dalton. I approve this message because I'll never do anything in Congress I wouldn't be proud to put my name on.
Leading off our discussion tonight is Bayle Dalton, Democratic candidate for Florida's 7th Congressional District. He won that primary tonight. He is a retired U.S. Navy captain and helicopter pilot and former chief of staff at NASA. First of all, congratulations on getting that nomination tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence. It's exciting. It's just like winning a semifinal, of course. Super Bowl still to come. And if you don't mind a quick correction, I'm still in the Navy Reserve, actually. So not retired yet, but 24 years in the Navy and Navy Reserve. And very proud of my service and looking forward to bringing public service in a different way to my home here in Central Florida.
So we have heard other Democratic candidates running against corruption, what they're calling the Trump corruption in Washington, and that's generally going on, even though they aren't running against a candidate who is specifically accused of any corruption, as you expected to be. How does the fact that you won't be running against Corey Mills change your campaign?
Well, I don't think it really changes it at all, Lawrence. I mean, what we've seen now is vindication that folks here in Central Florida are tired of the status quo. They are tired of this growing acceptance of corruption and grift among the people, who find themselves in Washington, D.C. And, our message starting in November is going to be the same as it is now, which is what Central Florida needs, what the folks of Seminole and Volusia County need is a representative who will be up in Congress and working for them. Polls show that that Democrats are already preferred in this district by Seminole and Volusia County folks. And of course, we just had additional polling released just today that say by a wide margin, folks are preferring somebody who will work across the aisle to lower these costs and this cost of living crisis that we find ourselves in. And, my opponent has said that these tariffs are working. He said that our economy is in a good spot. He has supported the war in Iran. And I think all of these things are just out of touch with what the folks of Seminole and Volusia County are asking for.
So we just heard Donald Trump say that he will not apologize for the $4 a gallon gas that he has imposed, basically, in the most direct presidential action taken to directly increase gas prices that we have ever seen, starting the war in Iraq. Do you think Donald Trump should be apologizing for those gas prices?
I absolutely think that he should be apologizing for sinking our economy with a war that has no strategic goals that have been briefed to the American people, no end state that's been briefed to the American people. And, we've got political leadership who seems to not even care about the welfare of our sailors and soldiers who are out there actually fighting this war. I was just on the doors this morning talking to voters, and I talked to a grandmother whose grandson was about to go on his first Navy deployment. And she said, how worried should I be? And I said, we've always got to be worried when we go out into combat areas. But I think, the families at home and our servicemen and women, they're being put in harm's way right now. They need some answers from this administration.
With your experience, what do you make of the situation on the USS Lincoln, the aircraft carrier off Iran, and other ships that have been reporting difficulties, to put it mildly, on board?
Yeah, well, I was pretty disappointed to see, some commentary out there, talking about how, sailors need to toughen up. Look, 24 years in the Navy and Navy Reserve, 4 deployments to Iraq, on the ground in Afghanistan with the Navy SEALs, commanded the Navy Special Operations Support Helicopter Squadron. Every single time in my experience that we've asked our servicemen and women to do the hard duty, they have stepped up and done it. And 9 months at sea is no joke. And, I think that this is, it's a twofold problem. One, it's indicative of the poor use of our armed forces and our Navy being spread thin across multiple areas because we've got an administration who can't decide where the fight should be and has entered into a war of choice, which again has no strategic end. So I absolutely think that our sailors and the folks that are out there putting their lives in danger, putting themselves in harm's way, deserve to have political leadership that can at least get some food and water to them.
Bill Dalton, Democratic primary winner tonight in Florida. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Lawrence, it's great to be here. Thanks. And working for some responsible representation here in Central Florida. People are ready for it.
Thank you very much for joining us. And here is Sherrod Brown's new ad in his Senate campaign in Ohio.
I'm Sherrod Brown, and I approve this message.
Our daughter Audrey has a rare neurological disease, but that doesn't stop her from dancing and going to school with friends. Without Medicaid, that wouldn't be possible. Last year, we met with Senator John Husted. He looked us in the eye and he said, "I will not cut this." 1 week later, he put 500,000 Ohioans' health care at risk, including Audrey's. You can't hug our daughter, take your picture with her, and then cut the care that she relies on. We're not going to stand for that.
Joining us now is former Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. He is now running for the United States Senate again. Senator, that couldn't be more clear. You cut Medicaid, you vote to cut Medicaid, or you don't.
Yeah, I hear those stories. That was the most poignant when I did a roundtable 6-8 months ago and met Audrey's mother, and it was a stunning moment. But I hear those kinds of stories from people that have been promised that they won't make those cuts, promised that they'll speak out against the war, for all these kinds of things that they feel betrayed. They over and over, people say, we didn't vote for this. We didn't vote for this war. We didn't vote for higher fertilizer prices. A farmer in Northwest Ohio told me their fertilizer costs went up $100,000 this year. None of that people thought they were voting for. People are angry. They don't see a government that's fighting back. They don't think they have a voice in Washington. John Husted has not spoken up for them or fought for them, and they're ready for change, as you know.
What do you see in the primary results that we're seeing around the country tonight, particularly in Florida? What are the indicators that you see there for Democrats, and what turns out to be the diminishing power of the Trump endorsement?
I don't know about the Trump endorsement, and I hear what you say, and I think you're right 99% of the time, Lawrence, on most things. But my focus is what I'm hearing about their lives. And, the system's more rigged than it's been ever in their minds. And in my mind, they see they're working harder. Just the other day, it was announced that CEOs' average pay is $17 million. That's bad enough. But what's really bad is the average CEO makes 300 times what the average worker makes. People know that. They know no matter how hard they work, they can't get ahead. More money's going out the door than coming in. And they see a government, from the White House to John Husted, they see a government that's essentially doing nothing to fight for them and to speak for them.
Ohio Senate candidate Sherrod Brown, thank you very much for joining our coverage tonight.
Thanks. And of course, Lawrence, if people want to help, come to SherrodBrown.com and help out. And I really appreciate all that people have done. The day we announced a year ago on this show, that day, 31,000 Ohioans went online and helped. And that's really driven our campaign in so many ways. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And coming up, Harvard beat Donald Trump in court again last week, and today a Department of Justice whistleblower says Donald Trump's so-called investigation of Harvard and his investigations of other universities were all fake. Harvard's constitutional law professor Lawrence Tribe joins us next. Last year, Donald Trump created his so-called task force to combat anti-Semitism, which he weaponized to attack some of America's greatest universities. One of the leaders of the Trump task force said this before any investigation of any of those universities.
We are suing every one of these universities guilty of anti-Semitism. Under Title VI, we're taking away their money, Mark. We're gonna take away every single federal dollar.
We're going to bankrupt these universities. That was the mission before collecting one bit of evidence. Today, a former Justice Department lawyer, Haley Van Arum, filed a whistleblower complaint with the inspectors general at the Departments of Justice and Health and Human Services and the Office of Special Counsel, alleging that, quote, the task force investigations into alleged anti-Semitism on university campuses were marked by extraordinary procedural irregularities, predetermined outcomes without factual or legal support, and disregard for Title VI's legal requirements and the First Amendment to meet the political mission of the task force. Ms. Van Arum and other DOJ assignees repeatedly warned that funding suspensions lacked legal basis and that evidence did not support findings of violations at Brown, yet HHS insisted on extracting a voluntary resolution agreement to satisfy political stakeholders. In the cases of Columbia and Harvard, no complete investigation was conducted. The Columbia investigation involved a brief review of draft findings prepared by others, and Harvard never underwent a full investigation before the university sued. HHS officials pressed forward with its politically mandated effort to disgorge enormous amounts of money from the universities under the pretext of rooting out anti-Semitism, including extreme settlement demands and coercive funding freezes. Columbia University agreed to a $200 million settlement with Donald Trump, and Brown University agreed to a $50 million settlement with Donald Trump, while Harvard University has continued to fight Donald Trump in court and has continued to win, including last week when a federal judge dismissed Donald Trump's lawsuit against Harvard University. Joining us now is Professor Laurence Tribe, who has taught constitutional law at Harvard Law School for 5 decades. Professor Tribe, big win for Harvard last week, but now we get the revelation that doesn't seem like such a surprise. All of this so-called investigation was fake.
It was all bogus, Lawrence. And if you look at the briefs that have been filed by the Justice Department, they say that there was a long and sordid history of anti-Semitism at Harvard. And the most dramatic example they give is that of a professor of Hebrew who was forced to convert to Christianity. Yes, that did happen in 1722, long before the United States was a country. The evidence before Judge Richard Stearns, the federal district court judge who dismissed the latest case, was essentially non-existent. He pointed out that the purpose of Title VI, which conditions federal funding on compliance with requirements of non-discrimination, was to make sure that non-discrimination goes forward, that discrimination is in the past. And he said that the only examples, the scattered examples of insufficient fighting against anti-Semitism at Harvard went back at least several years, not all of them, of course, as far back as 1722. But as he pointed out, nothing about the purposes of this law are served by picking out a university and saying we're going to find some basis to pull all of your federal funding and thereby hurt not only you and your students and your professors, but the community that benefits from all of the scientific research that places like Harvard do.
It seems when we read this task force report that the leaking of how the task force was working, that Harvard and the other universities had an obligation to fight this. They were fighting lies.
Well, that's right. We have an obligation because, as we saw with law firms like Paul Weiss that caved to the administration, it doesn't do any good to placate the tyrant. There's nothing that will satisfy him. He basically tells his Attorney General and his Secretary of Health and Human Services and Secretary of Education and all these cabinet members, go after this institution or that institution. I want to make an example of them. I think Harvard pushed back, and I'm very glad it did. I think President Garber and the board, the corporation of Harvard College, did exactly the right thing by defending academic freedom and free inquiry on behalf of all universities and colleges and junior colleges in this country. If Harvard couldn't stand up to this buffoon, nobody else could. So we are carrying the burden, and I'm proud that we're doing it.
It shouldn't have to be said that the president of Harvard University, Alan Garber, is Jewish, and he's not the first Jewish president of Harvard University, whose motto is Veritas, meaning truth. And it should be, in effect, the motto of all universities. And it's why in the task force report, it's so troubling to consider that Columbia, in effect, by compromising and settling with Donald Trump, joined in the lie that Donald Trump was telling about these universities.
Well, I think they did so under protest. They obviously felt coerced, but they should have fought back, as should everybody. And the fact is that when institutions cave to those who want to rule with an iron fist, not as duly elected leaders of a self-governing republic, but as wannabe dictators, when people cave to those demands, they are facilitating the collapse of democracy.
Harvard Law Professor Lawrence Tribe, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
And coming up, it is election night, as we know, in Donald Trump's home state of Florida, where Donald Trump's endorsement is no longer enough to win. That's next. Let's check back in with Ali Velshi for the latest on tonight's primary results. Ali, what do we have?
Let me show you a few things. I know you just had a really good conversation with Bale Dalton from the 7th District in Florida. This is interesting in that obviously he's come out with 45%. He's going to advance, but he's running against Ryan Elijah. It's an interesting story because Corey Mills was defeated in there. Corey Mills, who's wrapped up in a whole lot of scandal. And that would mean that it's a little bit more of an uphill battle for Dalton. But you spoke to him, and he said that his numbers are good, and he's looking forward to that race. So that doesn't seem like too much of a problem to him. Let's go down to South Florida to the 27th District. This is Miami-Dade. This is the most populous part of the entire state. It's also 74% Hispanic. Maria Salazar, former broadcaster, is the incumbent there. She, of course, is going to advance, according to the Associated Press. But take a look at Elliot Rodriguez, also a local news anchor in that district, winning that with 53.5% of the vote. Cuban in origin, and makes a point of saying, as a Cuban, because he knows amongst the Cuban American and a lot of the Latin American voters in Florida, they have a real aversion to the term socialism, the terms communism, even if it's democratic socialism. So Elliot Rodriguez making a point of the idea that he hates socialism and he hates communism, and he's not interested in any of that stuff. I also want to show you the 22nd district here. The Republican here is going to be Casey Askar, and he's going to be facing off against Pia Dandia. Pia Dandia is a school principal, winning handily with 68% of the vote. This is another one where the DCCC, the party, feels that there's an opportunity here to pick this up and make this a Democratic seat. This is obviously in a state where Republicans have gerrymandered in a way that gives them perhaps a 4-seat advantage, but this looks like a potential pickup. Lawrence?
Thanks, Ali. Time to get ready for the 11th hour.
That's right. See you in a few minutes.
Thank you. And coming up, it is humiliating enough to be Donald Trump's son-in-law. That should be enough. But today, Donald Trump went out of his way to fully humiliate Jared Kushner after Jared Kushner claimed to be having robust discussions. That's what he called it, robust discussions with Iran. That's next with retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertland. Donald Trump's son-in-law is very good at humiliating himself. I mean, very good, especially when he tries to sound like a diplomat.
The conversations between the U.S. government and different areas of the Iranian government at all areas is probably more robust than it's maybe ever been.
There are no talks or conversations going on. And that's not me saying that. That's word for word Jared Kushner's very nasty father-in-law, who, after Jared Kushner told the world on TV that the conversations he was having with Iran are more robust than it's maybe ever been, Donald Trump said there are no talks or conversations going on or scheduled with the Islamic Republic of Iran. In response to that direct contradiction and humiliation, Jared Kushner, of course, said nothing. So, who are you going to believe? A pathological liar or his cowardly son-in-law who would never be consulted by any other president of the United States about anything? This morning, Donald Trump did something that the 25th Amendment was written for. The 25th Amendment was written in anticipation of a president suddenly becoming physically disabled to the point where the president could not do the job, or mentally disabled. This morning, Donald Trump did something that deserves invoking the 25th Amendment and removing him from the office when he released a map of the Strait of Hormuz labeled as new U.S. territory. And not one Republican objected to that. Not one Republican has any idea whether that was a Trump hallucination or whether that is evidence of Donald Trump being gravely mentally ill this morning. Not one Republican knows whether Donald Trump falls into repeated bouts of complete mental collapse that produce things like the declaration that the Strait of Hormuz is new U.S. territory. They all know Donald Trump is insane. That's why they do not object to him saying things like that. And not only did Donald Trump publicly rebuke his son-in-law on the so-called robust conversations with Iran, Donald Trump threatened to bomb the country that has been trying to facilitate the negotiations with Iran. How's that for outright screaming presidential insanity? In his telephone interview with that Fox reporter that we mentioned at the beginning of this program, the reporter quotes Donald Trump saying, if Oman gets in the way, we'll bomb the shit out of them. Oman is an ally of the United States that has been the key facilitator in all of Donald Trump's failed negotiations with Iran. No Republican is bothered by Donald Trump saying he will bomb Oman because every Republican in Washington knows Donald Trump doesn't mean what he says. They know he is functionally insane. when it comes to public comment, especially about his war. They all know that Donald Trump is a pathological liar, and they operate on the assumption that he is simply lying and angrily hallucinating all day about many things. And so no Republicans rush to the microphone saying, oh, no, we cannot bomb our ally or even talk about bombing our ally. Every Republican in Washington knows they have an out-of-control clown as commander-in-chief now. The only commander-in-chief in history who could publicly talk about bombing an ally. Our next guest, retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, wrote for the Bulwark, "The president is threatening to bomb a country that for nearly half a century has quietly provided the United States with military access, logistical support, diplomatic assistance, and something increasingly rare in the Middle East, the ability to communicate with friends as well as enemies. For decades, Oman hasn't been in the way. It has often been the way." Joining us now is Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, retired commander of U.S. Army in Europe. He is an MS now military analyst. General Hertling, what is your assessment of where this war is tonight, especially with Donald Trump saying, I have no time schedule, I'm not in a hurry?
Well, one thing, Lawrence, is there's not a whole lot of clarity within the administration in terms of what's going on, as you just pointed out. The other thing that after I wrote that article that you just cited, President Trump this morning posted that graph or that map that you just showed that showed a circle around the Strait of Hormuz, which included part of Iranian territory, part of Omani territory, and part of the UAE territory, and claimed that he controlled that and it would be a new U.S. territory. That's the map there that you're now showing. If you see that circle, it encircles 3 different countries, as well as the waterway that provides the transit route. And what we've seen in terms of the discussion with both President Trump telling about how the strait is open, how it has been demined, and even included a comment that ships are already passing through, with the fact that Jared Kushner is saying he's conducting back-channel conversations with members of the IRGC, just don't seem to square. So as an American public, which has the passion of the military, it should have the support of the citizens, and it should have positive leadership within the administration. We're having some challenges in each one of those 3 areas that Clausewitz says you need to win a war.
And the importance of the madness of Donald Trump drawing that circle on that map is mostly with Iran. That's what Iran is looking at when they're looking at the person they are at war with. They are looking at someone who has literally no idea what he's doing minute to minute.
Yeah, and it seems that it's not only affecting Iran, Lawrence, but in combination with the president's comment on Sunday about South Korea and our alliances there, and the fact that he misstated the number of troops we have there, the importance of those exercises that are ongoing, but also things that he's done in the past with other allies, not only in Asia, but in Europe and also the Middle East. You can understand why it's not just Iran that's seeing this as foolish talk, but also it's concluding that we have some challenges with our allies and with people understanding what the president's trying to portray.
Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Pleasure, Lawrence. Thank you.
We'll be right back.